This is the Ask Faleskini Podcast, where the modern economy is discussed from a skeptic's perspective. Mr. Faleskini helps you distinguish what is sustainable in our economy and what isn't. Not everything that glitters is gold, and not all mud is dirty. The podcaster Mr. Faleskini provides no-nonsense advice. He had it all, lost it all, went bankrupt multiple times, and is now attempting to come back from zero with sustainable growth. There are numerous coaches and preachers on the internet that preach about positive thinking and how life is all roses if you just care to see it that way. Well, Mr. Faleskini is definitely not one of them. We recommend you ask Faleskini to keep it real. He discusses the darker side of the current economic reality, the side that's more important for your personal and business finance. His first intention is to help you keep what you already have. Not to be a complete party pooper, Mr. Faleskini will also hint at the earning opportunities in the economy today. In order to please the almighty algorithm, please like, share, and subscribe. And now it's time to start taking notes. The mic goes to the podcaster, the one and only Mr. Faleskini.
Thank you, Taylor, for this beautiful introduction. My name is Peter Faleskini. In this podcast, I will try to explain why inflation lowers your purchase power and why high interest rates force you to do non-leveraged business only. We've entered the times in which keeping positive cash flow might get hard. However, there will be many opportunities to build sustainable equity by taking advantage of the opportunities at hand. I will start with the quote of the month, then elaborate on why inflation lowers your purchase power and why high interest rates forces you to do non-leveraged business only. I will continue with my personal experience with interest rates hike or how I F up. In the Q&A session, I will answer the most common questions. To finish on a high note, I will close by mentioning a few opportunities in business. Let's start with the quote of the month. Milton Friedman famously said, "Inflation is inflicted by the government." I would like to add, government is the only participant in the economy that can print money. All other participants would like to lower the price of inputs and increase the price of outputs, but monetary policy is always in government's hand. Before we continue with the theory, I would like to tell you a bit about me. I'm now marching towards my 50s. I've experienced hyperinflation, deflation, super high interest rates, and negative interest rates. I've experienced large gains and losses, all due to interest rates hikes and inflation. My gains were due to successful interest rate spread and hedge, and large financial leverage. My losses were due to an over-optimistic assessment of the economic situation and undermining the changes in the economy when interest rates changed and inflation started. This time, I hope I'm ready, and this is the reason why I will do this podcast, and I will share my situation assessment and economic impact in this podcast. I will also share how I made a mistake and help you avoiding the same mistake. And now to the facts and theory about interest rates hike. Fed has already publicly announced step-by-step increase of interest rates. The European Central Bank is still quiet. However, European commercial banks already sense something. So the commercial loans have higher and higher interest rates. And the Russian Central Bank has recently announced a 20% base interest rate. And how will it all influence me as an individual or as a consumer? I will present two simple calculations where numbers are a bit rounded to make it easier for me to present. Let's start with my favorite topic, cars. Let's assume that we are in for $50,000 cars and we would like to get a 5 years lease on this car. If interest rate is 5%, I will get this lease for $1,000 a month. If interest rate is 10%, I will get this lease for $1,200 per month. If interest rate go to 20%, this will cost me $1,700 a month. Or if we go in another direction and we assume that we just want to pay $1,000 per month, for 5% interest rate, we will get $50,000 car. For 10% interest rate, we will get $40,000 car. And for 20% interest rate, we will get just a $30,000 car. And now let's check how interest rate increase will influence our purchase of houses. Let's assume we are on the market for a $500,000 house and that we would like to finance it with a 20-year mortgage. The house would cost us just over $4,000 per month if the interest rate is at 5%. If the interest rate go up to 10%, this same house would cost us $6,000 per month. If interest rate go to 20%, this house will cost us just over $10,000 per month. Or if we go in another direction and assume that we have $4,000 a month budget, with 5% interest rate, we would get a $500,000 house. With 10% interest rate, we would get $300,000 house. With 20% interest rate, we would get just $200,000 house. And now, if we project that into macroeconomic environment, this would result in smaller houses and cheaper cars due to interest rate increase will inevitably affect companies, and this will result in small turnover. And when so many companies are affected and when so many turnovers of companies shrink, the whole economy is affected. And this is the most important macroeconomic insight. 5% interest rate hike result in a 16% smaller car market. 5% interest rate hike results in a 35% smaller property market. If we simplify the interest rate impact on the economy, every 1 percentage point increase in interest rate will result in a 3% smaller car market and even 7% smaller property market. And now, let's address the second elephant in the room, inflation. The US is quite open about inflation, even if there are still hints that inflation will be only transitory. European Union is now admitting some inflation. However, they don't talk about transitory and they don't think it's important, or they try to present it in a way that will improve the growth. What I think is strange is that nobody from officials present inflation as a clear and present danger. If you ask me, all the alarms should be ringing because the inflation is getting out of hand. And let's check how will inflation influence me as an individual, as a consumer. Let's check this microeconomic view. Your money can get you less and less each month if inflation is high. In hyperinflation, your money is worth less and less each day. You will have to pay more and more for your shopping. For example, a week's worth of shopping is now cost you about $100. If there is a 10% inflation, it should cost you about $110 next time you do it. If it's a hyperinflation situation, then it might cost you $110 the next day. So if your cash flow stays the same, you will be able to afford less food, fewer clothes, less electronics, and similar. So it is important that you remember, if your paycheck is not increasing with inflation, you are getting paid less. Your de facto purchase power lowers. And now let's check the macroeconomics impact. Inflation lowers the purchase power. We already did that. Lower purchase power will result in lower production. Lower production will result in fewer jobs needed. Because there will be smaller production and you will need less workers and you will need less machines to do the work, there will be less need for a property. Then the lower turnovers will also result in less tax being collected. When there are fewer tax collected, the result is in less government spending. And of course, worse service. However, countries tend to take on more debt in order to continue spending. Let me continue with survival tips for the changes that are rapidly taking place in the economy, namely increased interest rates and inflation. Do not underestimate the current economic situation. Pay close attention to details. the best chance to defeat interest rate hike will be increased liquidity and lower debt. If possible, stay or become completely debt-free. The best chance to defeat inflation is to increase the reserves of goods. Buy everything you need in and around the house for a year or at least a couple of months in advance. Of course, take special care that you don't purchase goods that will rotten or get bad, or that you won't be able to use them because they expire or something. And for the companies, the advice would be you need to store more raw materials, more parts, replace just-in-time principle with all raw materials and parts on stock for this year's production. Let me conclude this theoretical part of the podcast with the dent in economy will be for every 1 percentage point increase in interest rates, market will on average become 5% smaller. Purchase power parity-wise, of course. Every 1 percentage point increase in inflation will result in about 3% smaller market. Of course, purchase power parity. And now that we went through the theory of micro and macroeconomic impacts of inflation and increased interest rates, I would like to present my personal experience on how did I F up. As a huge fan of buy-to-rent property, I would secure my pension by purchasing commercial property, an office building. I had to come up with 30% and the bank would finance 70%. 2 years after purchase, the local economy started shrinking. Office space became available everywhere and prices started to drop. So the rents started to drop. Getting a tenant to pay the rent was more and more difficult. So on top of the small rents, there was also a problem with payments. There were delays and some tenants did not pay at all. And it was impossible to, because these were companies, it was impossible to get money from them because they went into liquidation or in bankruptcy procedure. And then on top of all this, the increase in interest rate came. The first 1% increase wiped out my profit. And the second 1% increase has put my company into negative cash flow. We were losing money every month. On top of that, the bank had a buyer for the building. So I lost over 40% of equity, and basically I lost everything in this venture. And even worse, I got involved in land litigation. So what I learned from this are 4 lessons that I would like to present to you. And I hope they will help you avoid the mistakes I made. And if you are in buy-to-rent property, to get out on time and to save your company and your business as much money as possible. So lesson number 1 for me was I was focused too much on building equity and not enough on taking care of the cash flow. So how did that come about? So my idea was to pay off completely the property and then be the sole owner without mortgage. And I was trying to do that as fast as possible. So instead of taking a 20-year mortgage, I took 10 years mortgage. And because it was not interest-only mortgage, it was mortgage with monthly repayment of the principal, the installment was really high. And the high installment was good for me in the beginning because the cash flow was good and I didn't want to put any money out of the company. So I wanted to repay as much as possible. But when the economy went from, let's say, a bad to worse, and when interest rate, on top of that interest rate increased, I had a problem and I could not refinance the building because bank already had a buyer for the building. So it's important that you focus on cash flow. As you know, happiness is a positive cash flow and building equity is always second. Then lesson number 2 that I would like to present to you is get out while you can. There is always an exit. It's not meant to be the best case scenario when you have to do, let's say, early exit, but usually this is far best than the worst case scenario. So the name of the game is not maximizing your profit, but when you get in trouble, you have to start thinking in terms of minimizing your losses. Lesson number 3 I would like to communicate is don't be over optimistic regarding getting clients when the economy is going down. I understand that you have to be optimistic because you want to sell, you want to present your product or your office as best as possible to the market. However, don't be over optimistic. You have to be realistic what is possible in current economic situation. And lesson number 4 is really easy, simple, but I want you to remember it and to have that in mind when you're doing buy to rent. Higher interest rate will inevitably make your mortgage more expensive. If you have fixed interest rate, then maybe not directly. However, bank will try to get their money and they will try to charge you additional charges and they will push for refinancing in order to get higher interest rate for them. So prepare for that, be ready, have your liquidity ready, take care of the cash flow, and I hope your buy to rent project will be successful. And after this and other unpleasant experiences, I'm now involved in business development and consulting. And I would like to present to you. These were the top questions on the topic I have received on all the platforms in the last 30 days, and of course, my answers. How to protect your cash flow and assets against inflation. This is the most common question I get asked. This is, of course, the hardest question to answer accurately. So I will keep it safe and answer it theoretically. If you want to protect your assets, you have to make sure that assets keep generating cash flow. That is the safest bet. If you want cash flow in time of inflation, you have to bet on providing goods that are absolutely necessary for people and companies. For example, if you are in retail, you would be best off by providing food, water, and similar. So that is the stuff that people will have to purchase even if the prices increase. If you are in business to business and you are selling to companies, you have to provide services or goods that company absolutely needs. For example, they will need printers, they will need insurance, they will need accounting. These are the services that are the safest bet in time of inflation. And the second most asked question in these days was, is it possible to profit from the downturn? I always take a moment to breathe in, and this is my moment of joy. Yes, there are many opportunities in the downturn. And here is my compilation of opportunities that you can take advantage of to make money, to build equity, and of course, the most important part, to keep your cash flow positive. One of the biggest opportunities in time of downturn, and especially in time that we live in right now, where globalization is still present. However, it is hard and harder to come by raw material and for services. So the big players like Alibaba and Amazon are trying to portray a picture of almost perfect and timely supply. A reality for businesses is that there is a lot of things that are available on the internet. However, they are not on stock. So you can purchase them, and the company that sells it will only then get it on stock, and only after that they will ship it to you. So you will have a huge delay. What I found the most successful or efficient solution are brokers. So network of people that can conduct groundwork, namely check the merchandise on the spot before you pay it. So go in their storage, check if the merchandise that you're trying to purchase is on stock, if it's available for you, check the quality, and then when you pay, you get shipped immediately. I'm sure this year's broker will thrive, and it's even possible that all the brokers will get their former glory back if they will do their groundwork, if they will do quality control, and if they can provide quality service in real time for companies that are purchasing stuff internationally. Another huge opportunities are consultants. So basically not classical consultant, but solution providers. Financing is hard to come by. Now you or your company will need to become attractive to the bank. Risk management has become a bit more complex as just a claim that everything is insured for. There are huge opportunities in cars, in logistics, and I'm sure that consultants will have to teach companies how to adapt to the situation. There's a whole new world out there because the stability has now moved away and now everything is dynamic. Things change really fast. So all your calculation needs to be dynamic. All your processes needs to be adapted. So there is a huge change that will take place in economy and also in every individual company. I also believe that there will be a huge need for additional knowledge, and consultants can learn and provide this knowledge for the new dynamics that we are now entering. The whole economic environment has become much more dynamic. Maybe we could call it unstable, but let's keep it with dynamic. And I also see a huge opportunity in the property market. I know that commercial property did not fully recover from the work at home shock and now higher interest rates. So basically, you would have to charge more for the office. However, we now know that globalization and all the trade is practically over, and that more and more trade restrictions are imposed. There is also a mentioning of a trade war. If we check with Russia, you can see that right now situation is to the extent that almost all Western nations have imposed sanctions on Russia. And now all this will result that production facilities will be in high demand. Due to this deglobalization trend and self-sustainability initiatives in many different industries. So basically, industry companies will try to make things at home, or if they will not make them at home, they will try to purchase the same, let's say, raw materials, the same parts and similar from local supplier. And this local supplier will need production facilities. And because everything was outsourced, mainly to China and all this area and in other Asia, there was not a lot of production facilities being built at the time of, let's say, in the last 2 decades. And this will inevitably result in a production facility shortage in the midterm. There is another huge opportunity, and that is in offering services as a chief financial officer. I do believe that because of the inflation and the interest rate hikes, CFO is a must, even for small and mid-sized businesses. Endless or at least freely available liquidity is not given anymore. And let's be realistic, the worst case scenario for the company in case of inflation is that your services and your products become worthless to the extent that makes no sense to offer service or product anymore. This is because the inflation, if you keep the prices the same and your inputs are more and more expensive, you will just lose money. And on top of that, your inputs are really becoming more and more expensive. So you have to take special care that your inputs do not become more expensive before you increase the price to your end buyer or, let's say, consumer. So small companies will have to have special person that will take care of all the prices and everything, that will calculate your expenses and calculate the prices for the consumers or clients just in order to survive. So it will be additional burden on the company because the economic environment is getting more and more dynamic. I hope I was successful in this podcast and that I explained why inflation lowers your purchase power and how interest rate forces you to do non-leverage business only. Inflation and interest rate will present us with a number of challenges in today's economy. However, don't forget there are also many opportunities that have been presented to us due to changing economic environment. And there are 2 sentences I would like you to remember from this podcast, at least these 2. In the personal finance, frugal is the new black. In corporate finance, austerity is the new eco this year. And back to Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Faleskini, for this outstanding podcast. And thank you for listening to the Ask Faleskini podcast until the end. Mr. Faleskini would love to hear your feedback in the comments. And don't forget, if you want to know, ask Faleskini or listen to the Ask Faleskini podcast. In order to please the almighty algorithm, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.